So you probably will be asked.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining today's readings group. We have Weijia presenting politics in the Facebook area, and I will just hand it over to you now.
Awesome. Thank you, David. It's a great pleasure to read this paper and then lead the discussion. I think this paper does live up to its title. It's a very majestic title. You will see that I don't think the paper is fully convincing in its methodology, but I do think it's a very interesting attempt to to use existing data to study something that is very hard to study empirically, which is micro-targeting political advertisement to a very specific audience. So that's the first reason I think this paper will be interesting to us. It basically shows how can we use accessible data to empirically test something that should be really hard to test. I think the topic is also very interesting, obviously, because we colleagues in Soda Labs, a lot of us are working in this area, looking at micro-targeting of advertisement. And this paper basically shows a way to do it. And I think precisely because it's not a perfect paper, there's a lot of other things we can do with this kind of data and research design. So basically this paper look at whether micro-targeted audience who receive advertisements from political campaigns, whether they change their political behavior in the 2016 presidential election. So I don't think this audience needed to be convinced that the way we access political news has radically changed since the advent of social media. So a lot of us now finding news from Twitter, Facebook, and all kinds of digital media. This background, however, is not uncontroversial. So I think most of us are familiar with the research by Matthew Gansko and co-authors. We know that they basically find that the majority of American voters, they still access news through traditional sources like TV and newspapers. But I do think that in most electoral democracies, you only need to convince a small marginal group of voters to change their opinion. So the fact that the majority of Americans consume their news on traditional media, I think that cannot be evidence against the importance of research of social media.
Can I ask you something, like the more general? So I also read sometimes this kind of stuff. I mean, this is not a question related specifically maybe to this paper. You're on a more general. So usually this kind of information on where people get their information essentially about political campaign so these are all self-reported usually, right? I mean, there is no other form of making this kind of statistic or there is, or people have attempted to kind of because it's true that I mean, yeah, I don't know. It's out of curiosity because I also read this kind of stuff. People still get information, you know, from traditional channels, etc. But I always wonder to what extent, you know, this is true, or to what extent we can know better about this specific information.
Yeah, I think that's a very legitimate question, right? So the best we can do is to do things like PSID. We ask those people. Those respondents, like the time they spend on different media platforms. If we want to actually have an accurate measure, we probably need to have the researchers living in the house for a month and observe directly what's going on. That seems to be really hard, right? Especially given that you also want to know the time they spend on social media versus the time they spend reading newspapers and television. So even if you have full capacity to track what they're doing on the internet, that's not enough. Yeah.
No, maybe there are some pilot studies on, by pilot I mean on a limited number of people, where essentially you can track how much TV they watch and in particular which channel. So they do this kind of stuff for consumption data. So I know that if you wanna look at what you spend on your budget and how you sort of allocate your resources to within the household, they do this kind of diary thing where people need to sort of have a diary and they need to write their expenditure. I wonder if they did something like this with watching TV or news or stuff like this, because that would be it's still self-reported if you want, but it's not a recall question like in the last 7 days how much. It would be on a daily basis and probably measurement error would be much lower. But
definitely.
More general.
I'm not an expert in this literature, but I find this plausible, and given the expansion of the American time use survey, I think maybe people have already done that. We should look at it. Thank you, Danny, for the question. So by micro-targeting, we mean that with social media, you can now send different messages to different groups of voters, and by doing so, you can tailor your message according to their own taste, their own political issues. So that's one advantage of micro-targeting. Another advantage is that you can select the audience you want to receive the message. There might be some specific authentic message that you find you don't want some specific audience to receive. And in this case, if you have access to social media, you can send this message to, you can avoid sending this message to this community. For example, if you, with Donald Trump, one of his major platforms is about the trade competition with China, then he can avoid to send this message to Chinese Americans on Facebook. And this is something he cannot do if he appears in a national media and speak to TV host on a national media. He cannot avoid many Chinese Americans also saw that interview. So this is two advantages of micro-targeting, and Facebook, according to these authors, is a growing source of political information. And there's a lot of debate about the roles of social media. Basically, two views. One is something we're all very familiar with. This is the echo chamber theory, the idea that social media basically feeds of pre-existing ideology and biases. They basically use the algorithm to find what we really like and just ask us to watch very similar videos again and again. But there's also a competing theory arguing that social media allows communities that used to be very distant from each other. Now they can communicate with each other, exchange opinions, and may even reduce polarization and stuff like that. So this paper really wants to test which theory seems to be true in this specific context. So for more background, the political consequences of social media is a very hot topic since the 2016 election, especially given that, given the scandal of Cambridge Analytica and the fact that President Trump is actually the biggest spender on political advertisement on Facebook. He spent much more on Facebook versus Secretary Clinton. And there's a lot of speculation on popular media that Facebook and Twitter had a significant impact on Trump's victory in the 2016 elections. And their main contribution to the literature is that they look at the consequence of social media for political behavior. There has been a lot of studies about how traditional media like TV and cable news affect political outcomes. but far less attention and or rigorous evidence on social media. And this is where their contribution. So in this paper, they basically make two contributions. First is to overcome a measurement problem, which is actually a very difficult problem. So they basically measure the intensity of political micro-targeted campaign for very fine-grained audience. So they will be able to measure the intensity of advertisement for different ideologies, such as conservatives, liberals, and moderates, for different genders, age groups, race, and education groups. So this is very hard to do because they don't have data from Facebook on directly who are the clients for specific advertisements. So they have to infer this kind of information from the price fluctuation of a specific, if you want to put up an advertisement to a specific audience. So after measuring the intensity of micro-targeting, they use the data to further estimate the effect of this micro-targeting on the individual behavior of voters. And they basically do it through in this 2016 presidential election context. Okay, and as I said, the major problem is actually first the measurement difficulty. They actually don't know who is putting ads on Facebook. They only know the price fluctuation of Facebook advertisement. But based on the price fluctuation, they build up audience level proxy for the ways campaigns are distributed among internet users. It's a very simple idea. That is, if the marginal cost of providing this ad are essentially fixed over an intermediate duration of time, and Facebook is also essentially a monopoly here, then any change in the price must reflect the change in demand for this advertisement.
So are they using the impressions?
What's that?
So are they using the impressions? Like, because every time there is an impression on Facebook, that's the moment where the advertiser that paid for the ads needs to pay.
What do you mean by impression?
So like every time you reach, so on Facebook, the way Facebook works is on impression, right? So every time you click on an ad, that you clicking on an ad, spending time on reading that, that's an impression, okay?
Yeah.
So what's happening there is that they're using the impression as a proxy for the voting behavior. How engaged are the individuals on that advertisement?
It's even more indirect than that, actually. So if my understanding is correct, they only have the publicly available data on the price. An advertiser has to pay in a specific day to a specific audience. They don't know. Yeah, they don't know anything about what the ad, what are the ads, what are the specific content of these ads on Facebook. They only know the price the Facebook will charge to any advertiser if they want to put an ad on a specific day to a specific audience.
And they start from the assumption that the ads come from either Republicans or
you will see a lot of their effort is devoted to basically ruling out alternative stories, because the majority of the ads are posted by private business owners, right? So these are like you're advertising your product instead of political advertisement.
But that takes away all the lobbyists, and that takes away all the, for example, the Russian influence over the.
It's all confounded in this price index, and they spend a lot of effort trying to argue that most of the variation are driven by campaigners instead of confounding factors, as we're going to see. I don't think it's 100% convincing, but given the data they have done the best, I think. Yeah. So that's the first difficulty. Without knowing any of the content of this advertisement, how can we measure the intensity of audience level exposure to political ads? They provide answer to this question. And second, they design a quasi-experimental approach to explore some exogenous variation in individual Facebook exposure. So again, whether these are actually exogenous are up to debate, but I think they have done the best given the data. So what they do is, so I have talked a little bit about this, but they measure the intensity of political campaigns directly at a specific audience by the daily price of Facebook ad, micro-targeted at a US audience with very specific ideology, gender, age, race, education level, and locations. So just think you want to put an advertisement on June 1st, 2016, and you are contacting the Facebook employees saying that I want to post an ad to mostly conservatives who are white male between the age 50 and 60 and who has a college degree. And then the Facebook will give you a quote. So this is the price they're going to charge. And this is basically the data they use to proxy the intensity of political campaigns. And the reasoning is that, as I said before, if the marginal cost is of providing advertisement is fixed, at least the intermediate run, then given that Facebook is essentially a monopoly in their own market, any change in the price is a reflection of the change in demand. So if there's a price surge, at least in the short window they look at, it must be because there's a surge in putting more advertisement in this specific time period to a very specific audience. Okay, so this is just using very simple demand theory, trying to infer the intensity of political campaigns with those data that are available to public researchers. Okay. This is subject to a lot of debate, as we're going to see. In terms of the exposure to social media, the just look at self-reported media and Facebook usage in the American National Election Survey. So are you using Facebook? So even if Trump puts a lot of advertisement on Facebook in a specific day, if you don't use Facebook, you are not in the treatment, right? So this is an additional dimension they explore to measure the intensity of political advertisement to your specific audience. So that's the first measurement issue. Then the look at identification, which is I think quite smart, but I don't think it addresses all the concerns. So first, they match each American National Election Survey respondent to a political audience based on demographies, locations, and political ideology. So based on their self-reported demographic features, location, and political ideology, they're going to be matched to this audience. And then the estimated effect of exposure to Facebook campaign on changes voting behavior with respect to reviewed intention. So that's quite a mouthful, and it's better to explain using this figure. So suppose these two women here, they belong to the same very fine-grained audience. They live in the same state. They are of very similar age, the same education level, etc. So American ANES actually do two surveys here. So there's one survey before the election, before November 2016. So they ask the respondent, who do you intend to vote for? And there's another survey after the election. And they ask each respondent, who have you voted for in the election? So actually two surveys here. And the key outcome variable they look at is a change of vote. So when you say you intended to vote for Trump here, do you eventually actually vote for Trump here? And the same thing for all the voters here. And by exposure window, they explore the randomness in the day you got interviewed by those surveyors. So for the woman on the top here, because he got interviewed earlier, his exposure to Facebook campaign is potentially longer than the woman on the bottom. Okay, so this is a key randomness explore in the data. And the key outcome variable is also here. Okay, I hope this is clear. Let's quickly look at how they measure the intensity of political ads. They have two indices. The first one is a ratio. In the numerator, they have the price for the advertisement for a specific state, specific demographies, and a specific political ideology. In the denominator, it's a price index for the same state and for the same audience, for the audience with the same demography, but they look at all the political ideologies. So they argue that in this case, variations in price across audience with different political ideologies are due to political micro-targeting, which is totally not convincing for me, because we all know that liberals and conservatives, they are different on almost all dimensions nowadays. There are a lot of jokes about liberals in the Bay Area, they love kale salad and stuff like that. And there are far more vegetarians among liberals than conservatives, for example. So their consumption behavior, even of goods that have nothing to do with political world, also differs a lot from each other. And I don't think they can fully address this concern. So, but they did try to construct an additional index. Here they explore this, this randomness of your interview week. In the numerator, you have the price for this specific audience with specific ideology at election week. And in the denominator, they look at the price for the week that you got interviewed for the first time. Okay, and it's really hard to understand what this ratio is doing. So I'm trying to use this graph to explain what they're actually doing here. Suppose these gray curves are the price for this group, and these two women, they belong to the same group. So the price times series is basically the same for these two women here. So what does the ratio do here? For the first woman, she got interviewed here, and the election date is here. And the ratio is basically reflecting the slope of this straight line here. Okay? So the ratio will be positive and large for the first woman here. But for the second woman here, because the price at the interview week is essentially the same as to the election week, it will be a flat line. So the ratio will be very small for the second woman here. So I think they do explore relatively random variations in the interview week. But you can see they also omit a lot of information with what happens with of the price fluctuation, right? They just look at what happens initially and what happens at the election week. They didn't look at the massive fluctuation in the middle. So all the information here are basically lost.
So the other thing is probably that basically in the time difference, the identifying assumption is that say we belong to the same group, okay? But I get I'm the green one, you're the red one, so I get it later, you get it earlier. The one identifying assumption is basically that you're not gonna talk to me during that time.
Yeah, and also I think I'm also a little bit unsure. This is not my expertise, but I'm a little bit unsure about the independence assumption, Sutva assumption.
Yeah,
Essentially.
this
But,
is yeah. I'm talking about the Sutva, in fact. Yeah. Basically,
If
that's
you're talking about the cross-section Sutva assumption, I'm talking about if I received 1 day before you, there might be a lot of time serial correlation.
yeah.
So on both dimension, I think the Sutva assumption is not super.
Yeah, I agree.
Super rigorous here. But
on this particular point, since I'm not on Facebook, I don't know how it works.
Yeah.
If, say, Danny gets a targeted ad, can he like it and I get to see it as a result of Danny liking it?
Yeah, I think so. I think definitely.
That's tricky. That is tricky. Okay, so the way Facebook works, I know this because I spent a lot of time when I did
on Facebook.
I did the studies when I did the Cybers competition 2 years ago. So the way it works, you get, if you put like on something, your like can appear to people that share your same interest. So I'll give you the example of how the election here. If you talk to people here in Australia, most people are like, how is it possible here that the Conservative won the election in Australia? I don't know anyone that voted for Conservative. So the reason is you might like something and that thing that you like will appear just to people that share your same interest.
So this is also, I don't use Facebook very intensely. And so I don't know how the mechanism works. So if you like some message, will all your friends see them? Or Facebook actually use an algorithm to select the friends who are going to see them?
The second.
The second one, okay.
So you might spend time and like Facebook will highlight the profiles of people and ads and like political posts that you're interested in.
Mm-hmm.
That's the reason why behind the elections here in Australia, most people like, how is it possible that Conservative here won? I don't know anyone that voted for Conservative. This is the reasons, because the algorithm will target it and will show you posts of people and things that people like just to share your same interest. Unless you randomly select like on someone that posts for like Trump is great and another one that say Biden is great. Then Facebook there will evaluate that and will show you one post from both sides.
So there is one caveat to this argument, though, which is that so it's true what you said, but I don't know exactly how Facebook works, okay? But the thing is that among the characteristics used by this algorithm to determine the priority of the information that I see or the likes that you see, there must be some basic characteristics that sort of are independent of your likes, let's say, which is geography. So I'm saying this because the reason why I personally quit the Facebook for 4 months during COVID is because I have friends back home who are very close friends of mine, let's say, but because they stayed in the village that we come from, they stayed uneducated and they're totally into this conspiracy theory, etc. And so on Facebook, I could totally see all the time all these conspiracy theories. And so at some point I said, okay, enough is enough, and I closed the Facebook. Okay, so that means if you apply the same reasoning here, it could be that it's true everything you said, but on basic characteristics like geography, like the reason why I was seeing this post is probably because I'm from Pescantina, these people from Pescantina, and that's the big, so there are basic characteristics which have a heavy weight in this algorithm.
Well, the reason is because maybe when someone was posting something against, I don't know, like the 5G or whatever, you were actually spending time or either reading the article or your Facebook screen was on that post for a certain period of time, like let's say 3 seconds. So the algorithm will self-feed you all these posts, all these people that are, how do you say, that they're like they believe in those conspiracy theory, that will self-feed you these because he thinks you're interested in that. So you're self-feeding Facebook the people that you actually dislike.
Yeah, but this is okay. But this is saying that in the algorithm, there are a bunch of characteristics that map into what you see as a ranking. And among these characteristics, there is also this thing about how much time you spend. I'm not saying that this is not correct.
Yeah.
I'm saying that in this algorithm, there are some characteristics and some of them are basic, like literally your come from Pescantina thing that weights more than other like I don't know, likes on football or something. I don't know.
So Sutva is violated.
Yeah.
Sutva is violated. I mean, for sure it's violated. Yeah. I mean, yeah.
So Sutva has to be something like, so the Facebook does not manipulate or intervene the exchange of information between these two women. That's right. So that's
no, because it's fixed. Yeah, exactly. The algorithm doesn't change every day. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think it's a profit maximizing.
Yeah, so that's a little bit problematic. Yeah, I can see this is yeah, I think, yeah, that's also fits into of our region concern about all kinds of stories that may violate Sutva assumption here. So with that caveat in mind, I do think they have done the best that can be done with the data, given the limitation. Let's see what they can say with this data. Yeah, so they put this figure here, which I think is actually showing how problematic their research design is. I don't know why they show it here. They argue that it's super convincing, but for me, I think it's very, very problematic. So this is basically, they're looking at, this is not only American election. These are a lot of different elections between July 2015 and February 2017. We have 45 elections here. And this is basically the price index we have seen before, how it changes before and after election. So you can see starting from about 4 months before the election, the price of putting a Facebook ad began to increase, and it began to increase really steeply 2 months before the election. So that's all good. Seems to be a lot of advertisement put on Facebook before the election. What really worries me, and you guys can tell me whether my worry is reasonable, is that the decline of price after the election is very gradual. So it just declines and declines until 4 months after the election. But why politicians or candidates, they want to put advertisement 3 or 2 months after the election has been finished, I don't know. They should not put advertisement 2 months after election, right? So I think we should see a really sharp job.
One explanation could be that maybe they pay for a certain period of time of advertisement. So you can choose a plan, and the longer you go, maybe it's going to be cheaper for you to run those ads. So maybe they paid for like 6 months, and like that was like.
But this in any case you should see. But this doesn't. So in any case you should see still drops. So yeah, maybe this is true. But I mean, the argument Weijia says is still valid. I mean, you should see still things like this, no?
Yeah. What is the value for Clinton, for example, to put an advertisement in December 2016? Like, I don't know. Yeah, I think this is actually very problematic. I find there's a lot of. This actually shows that a lot of variation actually not in the political world. It's actually related to private consumption, private advertisement put out by private business, not by political campaigners.
So sorry, Weijia, I might have missed it, but so Facebook doesn't touch the price mechanism. Is it just demand driven, or is it that we observe that Facebook is just riding on, people got used to high advertisement prices in the months before, and then I just gradually, price discriminate based on that.
Yeah, exactly. That's the argument, and they have some evidence supporting this assumption that marginal cost does not change over intermediate run. So it must be like the demand is shifting throughout intermediate.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that part is okay. Just we don't know who are demanding for more political advertisement. We absolutely have no information on that. They're trying to argue that it's all put there by Trump and Clinton election teams, which is, to me, looks very problematic because the decline of price here is too gradual.
Yeah. I mean, and basically we assume that Facebook tells us the truth about their pricing mechanism.
Yeah, that's another. You guys have the Facebook grant. I hope you can tell me.
Yeah, no, we have the agreement. We can say naughty things about Facebook. But,
okay, awesome.
Yeah. And the other thing regarding the Sutwa discussion, so the pricing, you pay the same per head and not per, so a user with a lot of friends targeting a user with a lot of friends costs me the same as targeting someone with 5 friends.
I actually don't know. I think
okay.
we should, I think some.
Sorry, I'm asking.
Yeah,
we are all asking you too much about the.
There's a difference.
It's like I have. It's like I haven't looked at the data they used, but I think it should be very easy to verify. Just use the Facebook API they have, to call the data and see what's going on. Yeah. And also we can just pretend we are one of the advertisers who want to put an ad on Facebook and just go to their website and type out of demand and see what kind of questions we need to fill up there. Yeah.
If you go on Facebook and you try to run an ads, that will tell you all the differences, like
exactly.
How precise you want to be, how far you want to go, and the price change based on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, quick question. But does the paper say, or do we know what percentage of sort of total ad at a certain point is sort of related to political? Is there any, I guess not in this data, but.
They didn't say it. They didn't say it. Yeah. Oh, yeah, I did. Like when I skim over the paper, I didn't say it. And this is obviously a major problem. As I have said, the liberals and conservatives, they have very different behavior, even in terms of private consumption.
Weijia, one more question. It says here the 45 fair election took place between July 2015 and February 2017. I have to admit, I'm not familiar like when those elections actually take place. For example, if I think about the presidential election, this takes place obviously like beginning of November. So after that would be a Christmas, right? So you would expect maybe more ads to be placed. So if like if these elections always take place around like some big holidays, like holidays follow after that, shortly after like Thanksgiving and I don't know, right? You could explain first, I mean, depending on the exact timing, that maybe this increase already captures this like, well, we are getting to these big holidays where it is profitable probably to place ads for any kind of business. Or it might help to explain this like gradual decrease, depending on when those elections actually take place, because here we only see it right in relative time and then over each other. But I don't know the US if it's like really dispersed temporarily or if they are all like kind of at the same time. So I don't know. And I don't know if they.
I think we have been. Yeah, we have been like really nasty referees until now. And I want to discuss this paper simply because I think the data does show us that it's possible to at least get a general sense of what's going on with publicly available data. I think they should not put this figure here at all. Like it just gives so many, makes their paper really vulnerable and for no good reason because and also because all of us have been writing papers on this topic, I just want to see what kind of data available from Facebook for research. And given the like the current state of Facebook in US, where their PR team is not doing a good job, it seems that it's very hard to work with their public available data. Yeah.
I think there's a problem also of privacy. The fact that like most of the data cannot be shared.
Yeah.
So there's like a certain limit. And if you go to Europe, it's even worse because Europe has the GDPR that allows you can actually delete all the data that you preserved for many years.
Oh yeah, I know that part. But given, yeah. Okay, so with all these caveats in mind, I'm still quite curious of what they found and how they interpret these results. So yeah, this is just an review of their data again. They have the individual exposure to the political campaign through self-reported Facebook status and the price surge or decline that they use to proxy political advertisement. They also have individual ideology and voting decisions, and they have the trend of political campaigns on other media, which so they basically put all these variables in the same regression here. This is the main regression. So the outcome variable is 1 if a voter changed her voting preference between the pre and post-election interview dates. Okay. So I initially stated I'm a Clinton voter, and later on I voted for Trump. Then this dummy will be 1. If I stick to my choice throughout the month, then this is 0. Okay. So for the independent variables, the 2 key variables is of course exposure and intensity. The exposure is basically your self-reported Facebook usage, and the intensity of political campaigns is this price index that approximate demand for political advertisement according to the authors. And the key coefficient they want to look at is gamma, which is the coefficient of this interaction term. So in theory, those Facebook ads should only be observed by Facebook users. So if you don't have a Facebook account, no matter how many ads Trump put on Facebook, you should not be able to see them. Okay, so this is the key coefficients, and they have a bunch of control variables. Yeah.
On a purely summary statistic base, so what is the percentage of people who actually change their opinion? So what is the phenomenon that is trying to be
they have it here. Let me try to see whether I can find it in their paper. Let's see. I think I saw them here. This is Facebook coverage. Sample, yeah. Oh yeah, any change of voting behavior.
18%.
18%, which is actually quite
big. Wow, yeah.
And 9% of the voter change of their Trump vote, 10% change of Clinton vote. Yeah.
So that means that they didn't want to change for Trump and they changed for Trump.
So what they find is, we are going to see in a minute, after they receive tons of political advertisement, Trump supporters, they will not change their support of Trump. So Trump was basically consolidating his base. His base become almost fully consolidated. There's no way to change the mind of Trump voters if they saw a lot of political advertisement.
This just looks at the ads, right? That's it. The official ads ran by the Republicans and the Democratic.
Yeah. It can. If you have, I think at that time during September and October of 2016, I think a lot of us saw a lot of crazy ads on Facebook, right? And many of them are not put there by the official campaigning team, but they are intensely political. A lot about Clinton's supposed illness and tons of crazy stories there. And again, we can distinguish these political advertisements posted by a third party versus by the official team. Yeah.
Because there's also the story of the fake news. Like, clearly most of the fake news were in favor of Trump.
Yeah, and the Russian trolls too. Yeah.
So like you can't control third parties that intervene in the campaign, and especially on, like, you can do it on TV and news, but you can't do it on Facebook because it's
So, I think that with that caveat in mind, what we find is still that if you saw more political advertisement, no matter what are the political advertisements, you're going to be ardent Trump supporter, basically. And that is independent of what kind of ads you saw on Facebook.
But because this change can be derived from like third videos from third parties.
Yeah, exactly. Third parties, and it can be from anyone. It can be anything. But the result is that you're going to be ardent Trump supporters if you start as a Trump supporter. Yeah. So that's basically what they find. Let's go back to the slides. These slides. Let me share again. Okay. Okay. So the general results. First, political macro targeting is very effective. It works, mostly for Trump. And micro-targeted advertisement also make it less likely for individuals to change their vote intention. So they're going to be very fixed in their political opinion and behavior. So they interpret this as intensification or polarization. And the WHO political ads mostly helps Trump. It increased turnout rate among Trump supporters and also among moderate supporters. But it actually depressed turnout rate among Clinton supporters. They have a bunch of tables that basically look exactly the same with each other. So I just cover two of them, and then I will conclude. So we have a little bit more time to discuss. The first thing they find there is that the least valuable audience see their relative price drop by about 15% by the time of election, whereas the most valuable audience see their rise by up to 35%. So the least valuable audience is probably Berkeley undergrad who will never ever vote for Donald Trump. So you cannot change their mind at all, and you don't need to change their mind as Clinton campaign team too, right? And who are these most valuable supporter audience? They are the voters in Florida and Ohio, in the suburb, and always moderate has been moderate for their lifetime. And if you want to put an ad to this audience, you have to pay additional fee of 35%. So this is the main table. So the dependent variable is a change in vote behavior. So whether you have changed your vote. And the key coefficient is on this interaction term here. We can see that an increase of 10% in the relative price between the interview and the election week reduce the likelihood of changing one's vote by 3.9%. Then the effect is mostly driven by men and for conservative voters. Okay, so if you saw a lot of advertisements before the election as a conservative man, you will not change your mind at all. You will stick with your original choice throughout the campaign. And this is especially true for Trump votes. An increase of 10% in the price reduce the likelihood of changing one's vote of Trump by 4.5%. And this is mostly driven by women, moderate and conservative voters, and people who initially say that they are going to vote for Trump. So all of this are helping in the direction to get Trump elected. They also did a simulation exercise in the paper showing that if we take their estimate really seriously, Facebook did a very good job to getting Trump elected by just tilting the balance a little bit. So that's, they have tons of tables that all exactly look like this. If you are interested, you can go and check them. There's also a very interesting result about turnout, where they find that Trump voters are more likely to turn out after they receive political advertisement, but Clinton voters are a lot more likely to abstain, to withdraw from election after they receive political advertisement. All of these are consistent with the stylized facts that Trump is using the social media much more heavily than Clinton. So this paper basically trying to design a smart methodology to measure the intensity of micro-targeting through the online advertisement price. And they find that micro-targeting strategy is really successful in depressing vote change, increased turnout among Trump voters, but less so for Clinton voters. Okay, so that's this paper.
Thanks so much, Weijia.
Yeah. Any more discussion?
For me, that was more than like Republicans versus Democrat. It was more like populism versus
Exactly. Yeah, it's more about populism versus establishment. It's not. I don't think it's mostly about the party identity.
Because they talk about the quantity of ads that Trump put it on Facebook, but it's also important to focus on the quality, like what kind of ads. I think that's also very important, because if we know that fake news spread faster, like 3 times faster than like normal news. Mm-hmm. And that for sure, like plays an important role. So another thing that they should consider in that is like the spread of fake news during that time. Because if fake news spread faster, Trump knows that, it's easy to put something connected to Clinton that is not true. And there you go. Mm-hmm. You're ready for dinner there. Like, it's simply gonna reach 3 times the people that Clinton will reach with normal, honest campaign. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And also the fact that like social media polarized even more the voters in America. I saw a graph where like this, since the introduction of social media, there's more polarization towards the 2 extremes. And like a lot of like the electorate in America is in the sides. It's not anymore Democrats or Republicans. So like if you take the right key, it's easy to influence them to vote for you rather than someone else.
That is actually contested by the paper by Matthew Gamsko and co-authors. They basically argue that, so you probably have seen this piece on Journal of Economic Perspectives. They argue that social media actually didn't play a role in polarization per se. We find that social media actually increase the expansion of social media is most significant among those groups with the least polarization or something like that. So I think, for me, I think social media plays a more salient role in populism, not polarization per se. Yeah. And Palm just shared this article about Zuckerberg's recent, from last year, saying that we estimate these ads from politicians will be less than 0.5% of revenue next year, which is, so this is, as I said, this is a big concern of me too. Like the vast majority of the ads actually run by private business, not by politicians.
Weijia,
yeah.
Did they, because they talk about turnout, but that's again, I guess, a retrospective answer, but if we take that answer at face value, did they make a comparison towards, what was the biggest effect in terms? So, for example, after Trump got elected, people were like, yeah, because they had these campaigns and Trump was able to mobilize people via Facebook. But then other people said, no, the biggest effect of these targeted campaigns on winning the vote ultimately was to keeping unsure Democrats home. So for example, you know, the one of the campaigns said that the Democratic establishment pushed Bernie out, and all the Berkeley undergraduates who would vote for Bernie Sanders then stayed home. And so, I mean, does the paper speak to that, whether, you know, it was that effect, or more the mobilization effect that had an impact, especially, oh yeah, maybe.
Here. So they find that, as I said before, if you're a Clinton supporter, like when you were interviewed for the first time, you said, I intend to vote for Clinton. If you receive this advertisement, you're more likely to stay at home, which is a Berkeley undergrad story who saw a crazy ad about Clinton having cancer, and then he stays at home. Mm-hmm. And if you are a Trump supporter, you're more likely to turn out, which is consistent with some statistics that Trump used social media far more intensely than Clinton. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's here, yeah.
And also, given that they have the state, like they have the state information, did they look at, you know, they could basically, I mean, some states were so close. Did they kind of back out whether the Facebook effect was somewhat decisive? I know, I mean, we talk about very few observations then by some states.
Yeah, I think they have some simulation in the paper, which I didn't cover, but they do find that if we believe the estimate, we take the estimate really seriously, it plays a very important role in putting Trump into the White House. Yeah, and in a lot in like Florida and Ohio, that might be true. Like I think Berkeley undergrad would probably not vote anyway, because California will never be a Republican, will never vote for Republic as a state. So the incentive to vote is extremely low in California. Yeah. So if you remember in the election week, as soon as the ballot box was closed in California, New York Times immediately announced that all the 55 votes went to Clinton from California. Yeah, they don't even need to count the votes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. I think this is super interesting discussion, and I think this fits of spirit of Solar Labs to look at alternative or even strange data to see how far we can go with this data. Yeah.
Yeah. No, thanks. Great presentation, Weijia.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Paul.
Cool.
Thank you, sir.